When winter hit Viking lands, it didn't mess around. We're talking months of freezing darkness, snowdrifts taller than a man, and winds sharp enough to cut through wool. But Viking farmers didn't just survive it. They kept their families, livestock, and entire communities alive through brutal Arctic nights. How? Not with fancy gear or heated homes, but with clever tricks, centuries of know-how, and the animals they raised. From goats that warmed huts to cows that kept milk flowing through the frost, Viking survival was never a one-person job. It was a farm-wide effort, and believe it or not, some of their methods still make sense today. Let's take a look at 5 powerful ways Viking farmers got through the worst of winter with help from hooves, horns, and a whole lot of grit. Sleeping beside the livestock. During the long, brutal winters of the Viking Age, staying warm wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. In a world without modern insulation, space heaters, or even chimneys, Viking farmers had to get creative, and one of their smartest moves, sleeping under the same roof as their animals. Viking longhouses were more than just family homes. They were shared living spaces with their livestock. Cows, goats, and sheep didn't stay out in the cold or in a separate barn. Instead, they were housed in the lower section of the longhouse, often just a few feet away from where the family slept. A simple wooden partition or low stone wall separated the animals from the people, but the warmth was shared freely. And it wasn't some desperate last resort, this was part of the design. A single cow gives off enough heat to warm a small room. Now imagine a few cows, some goats, maybe even a pig or two. Suddenly, your freezing longhouse turns into a functional, if slightly smelly, heat source. But there were other benefits too. Sleeping near livestock protected them from wild predators, thieves, and the elements. It also made it easier to check on animals during the night, especially valuable for birthing animals or the sick during winter months. Plus, let's not forget the milk. Goats and cows needed care to keep producing, and keeping them close meant they could be fed and milked easily, even during storms. Today, some off-grid homesteaders and Arctic communities still build similar structures that house animals and people in close proximity. It may sound old-fashioned, but when the power's out and the snow's 3 feet deep, body heat from a warm cow can be a lifesaver. Goats. Goats might not seem like winter survival champions, but to Viking farmers, they were absolute essentials. Hardy, adaptable, and surprisingly useful, goats helped turn freezing nights into manageable ones, and not just by providing milk or meat. First off, goats could survive on rough forage that other animals might turn their noses up at. In a season when fields were buried under snow and grain was precious, goats could still thrive on bark, dried weeds, and hay scraps. That meant Viking families didn't have to waste valuable resources keeping them alive. They did just fine on leftovers. And in return, they gave milk rich in fat and calories, which was perfect for making cheese, butter, and hearty soups that stuck to your ribs. But one of the most underrated benefits? Warmth. When huddled indoors during a blizzard, goats didn't just take up space, they helped heat it. Their smaller bodies warmed quickly and gave off constant, radiant heat. Viking children would often cuddle up next to them at night. And if you think that sounds strange, remember, in sub-zero weather, a furry, warm goat can feel better than a blanket. Goats also signaled early warnings for weather changes or threats. They're alert, sensitive, and not shy about making noise if something's wrong. A sudden restlessness might mean wolves nearby, or an incoming storm. If you're into homesteading or off-grid living today, goats still have a solid reputation. They're low maintenance, produce valuable dairy, and take up less space than cows or horses. Viking farmers figured that out 1,000 years ago, and their wisdom still applies. Not bad for a scrappy little animal with horns. Wool cloaks and layered bedding. Forget modern sleeping bags or thermal blankets. When it came to staying alive on a freezing Viking night, wool was everything. Viking families relied on thick wool cloaks, woolen bedding, and plenty of layering to trap body heat and keep the cold at bay. Wool wasn't just warm, it was smart. Unlike cotton, which loses its insulating power when wet, wool stays warm even when damp. That made it perfect for a climate where snow could blow straight through the cracks in your wooden walls. Viking sheep, like the hardy Icelandic or Norwegian breeds, produce dense, waterproof fleece. After shearing, the wool was cleaned, spun, and woven into heavy cloaks, tunics, socks, and blankets, all by hand, often by women who knew the value of a warm home more than anyone. At bedtime, Vikings didn't just toss a blanket over themselves. They piled on layers, fur pelts on the bottom, wool blankets on top, and sometimes even cloaks worn to bed. Children often slept in a huddle, sharing warmth with siblings, and adults often slept fully dressed, cloaks and all, to retain every bit of body heat. Beds were usually simple wooden platforms or straw-stuffed sacks, but with the right layering, they became cozy winter nests. In some longhouses, beds were even built into the wall like small wooden boxes, keeping out drafts and helping trap warmth inside. Picture it: a small, fur-lined wooden alcove, wrapped in wool, shared with a sleepy child or two, and maybe a dog. Modern survivalists still praise wool for a reason. Whether it's a military-grade blanket or a hand-knit scarf, wool continues to be one of the best natural insulators. The Vikings didn't need synthetic gear. They just needed good sheep and a bit of weaving know-how. Hay-insulated sleeping nooks. When Viking families hunkered down for the winter, they didn't waste heat. Every design choice in their homes, no matter how simple, was meant to conserve warmth. One of the cleverest tricks? Sleeping nooks insulated with hay. Now, hay might not sound like much, but to a Viking, it was a lifesaver. Bundled between walls or packed beneath bedding, hay acted like natural insulation. In homes where windows were little more than small holes with wooden shutters, and where the wind could sneak in through roof beams, every bit of insulation counted. Many Viking longhouses had low, built-in beds along the walls, some enclosed with wooden sides or thick curtains. Families would stuff hay or straw between the bedding layers, or pile it up beneath and around the bed itself. The hay trapped body heat and blocked cold air from circulating underneath. In the harshest regions, the sleeping areas might even be partially sunken into the ground and padded with hay along the edges, like sleeping in a giant straw-lined basket. Hay was cheap, easy to harvest, and had multiple uses. If it got damp, you replaced it. If it stayed dry, it lasted for weeks. It could even serve as a quick mattress or pillow if nothing else was available. Today, off-gridders and natural builders still use straw bales for insulation. The principle hasn't changed. Nature provides some of the best thermal protection you can get, especially when you're not relying on electric heat. So while modern folks might scoff at the idea of sleeping on hay, Viking families knew better. It was scratchy, sure, but it kept you alive. And when the north wind blew and the fire burned low, hay walls turned cold corners into warm cocoons. The hearth as the heart of the home. In every Viking longhouse, there was one thing that never stopped burning during the cold months: the hearth fire. Positioned right in the middle of the home, this wasn't just a place to cook dinner, it was the beating heart of survival. The open hearth offered warmth, light, and a means to prepare food, all from a single flame. The smoke drifted upward, eventually filtering through a roof vent or simply seeping out through the rafters. There were no chimneys, just smoke-darkened beams and a fire that needed constant tending. But without it, the entire house would be plunged into cold and darkness. Vikings arranged their sleeping and sitting areas around the hearth. At night, families gathered close, eating warm porridge or soup, drying damp clothes, and sharing stories. The fire's radiant heat was crucial, not only for comfort, but to keep the dampness at bay. Cold Viking winters weren't just uncomfortable. They could be deadly if mold and chill set into your bones or your bedding. The hearth also doubled as a survival tool. Herbs were hung overhead to dry in the smoke, pots simmered slowly for hours, and water was kept from freezing. Fire-hardened tools, dried meat, warm stones tucked under blankets, it all started here. And the best part? The hearth fire was never supposed to go out. Letting it die meant a cold, hard restart, sometimes literally using flint and steel in the morning darkness. So someone always kept watch. Today, we might call it a fireplace, but for Vikings, it was life itself. No batteries, no thermostats, just wood, flame, and a shared commitment to keep it alive through the longest nights of the year. Surviving a Viking winter wasn't about being tough. It was about being smart. These weren't mindless warriors swinging axes all day. They were farmers, hunters, and families who understood their land, their animals, and how to make the most of what little they had. Whether it was sleeping beside a warm cow, lining your bed with hay, or never letting the hearth go cold, every choice was rooted in practicality. And what's striking is how many of those old tricks still work today. In an age of electric blankets and central heating, we've forgotten how much nature can provide, if you know how to work with it. Modern off-gridders, homesteaders, and survivalists are rediscovering these ancient hacks not just out of nostalgia, but because they're effective. And maybe that's the bigger lesson here. The Vikings didn't survive winter because they had the latest gear. They made it through with patience, cleverness, and an unshakable sense of community. So the next time the power goes out or you're camping in the cold, remember, you've got 1,000-year-old wisdom on your side. And if it was good enough to get a Viking through a blizzard in a wooden house, it might just be good enough for you.